What up, guys? Welcome to another edition of the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Did you ever watch that show, Masterpiece Theater?
It's been a while. It's not on anymore, I don't think.
No, it's not.
Is the guy the host? Is he dead?
I'm sure he looked like he was pretty old back then, right? So I can vaguely remember it.
Yeah.
Random way to start this podcast, but glad you guys are here. So today we're going to do some questions. We've got 5 questions. Some of them are very specific to Jiu-Jitsu. Some of them are just kind of fun questions that came through. That'll make for some fun conversation. And again, as always, thank you for being here today with us. And again, thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys have never tried CBD, or if you would like to try CBD from Charlotte's Web, again, they are one of the premier companies out there that make a top shelf CBD product. Again, they are third-party tested, so what's in the bottle and the label is what's in the bottle. That's it, right? It's not a roll of the dice like it can be with certain CBD products because of the fact that it's not regulated by the FDA. They have a lot of different products, everything from balms to the tinctures, which is like the little eyedropper, to gummies and things like that, which they will sometimes infuse with other dietary supplements to, sort of help for a particular effect. Like maybe it's focus, maybe it's rest, whatever it might be. So again, check out their website if you want to by going to charlottesweb.com. It's the website, and you can look through their stuff. And if you find something you'd like to try, use the promo code Chewjitsu30, CHEWJITSU 30, and you'll save 30% off your order. Also, big thanks to our buddy Matt at Epic Roll for supporting the podcast. Again, if you guys have never checked out his website, you can go to epicrollbjj.com. He has a ton of great stuff, everything from no-gi gear, rash guard shorts, some of my favorite no-gi gear out there, gis, joggers, hoodies, anything merchandise related, gear related. He has some really cool t-shirts. And again, he comes up with all the designs that he does. And again, he's a guy that supports a lot of up and coming young competitors that are out there, which I think is pretty cool. And so if you want to check out his gear, go to epicrollbjj.com, and the promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off. And if you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the-Jiu-Jitsu-podcast. Upon joining, you'll get access to an exclusive library of content that we've created with bits with me and Eugene, with every single guest that we've ever had on the podcast. We have a little snippet with them. And there's also some extras such as seminars that I've recorded, warm-up routines for jiu-jitsu that Eugene's done. So if stretching and warm-up routines is something you're interested in, he has that in there. Narrated rolls, all kinds of other stuff. It's all of it's in there. You have access to it, again, by joining the Patreon, which supports the podcast and gives you access to some cool stuff. And last but not least, if you want to join my email list, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. Upon joining, you'll get access to some exclusive ebooks that I give away. They're free. And then upon joining, you then get my daily email, which goes into all sorts of different stuff. If you like the videos, you like the podcast, you like that stuff that I put out, you'll like that email. And again, you can unsubscribe at any time. So with that said, guys, let's jump into these questions. So we got a bunch of questions. We're going to go through about 5 today. I figured we'd keep it short and sweet. Here's one that I figured we could both talk about. This kind of goes into the stuff that I've been doing recently with my stretching and mobility exercises, and it's something that Eugene knows really well. It says, what's the best way to go about unlocking your hips? I really struggle with poor mobility and stability when I'm low to the ground. I'm not sure about the second part of it, but unlocking the hips. So basically, I imagine what you mean is you got those damn hips that are just, they're tight. They're like locked in place. And so, Eugene, what are your thoughts on that?
So you got to make sure a couple things. You got to start. I tell people, look at the hips, but also look at the low back, look at the knees, look at the ankles. A lot of times when you're squatting, and I don't know if they're asking specifically about squatting or not.
I think maybe, I don't know.
So as far as the hips go, it could be a couple different things. Like you want to figure out if it's a joint issue or if it's a kind of a tissue muscle issue. And so like there's a way I'll try to describe it. It's, you kind of think of an idea of an opening or a closing angle. Okay. So an opening or a closing angle would be if I bring my knee to my chest, if I get a pinch in the front of the hip, that means there's something going on with the joint itself. So,
so like, for instance, if I bring the knee up to my chest,
yep,
and I feel in my hip crease,
you feel like a pinch in the front of your hip crease. That means there's some kind of issue a dysfunction in the hip itself, the joint itself, versus if you bring, your knee to your chest and you feel like a little stretch in your buttock, that means it's just like a soft tissue, like a muscular issue. So that's kind of one thing. You don't want to cause any pinching in the hips. That's one thing. So you got to figure out what the issue is essentially. And then you got to start working on, from there, mobility. It could be dynamic movements, like moving in and out of a squat, like maybe go a very slow squat. It just depends on what your limitation is for the hips. Like if it's a rotating your hip in and out, or bringing the knee to the chest, or bringing your leg behind you. It just kind of depends on what that is, and you can address that. One of the ways that I love to are like joint circles or controlled articular rotations. I have like on my YouTube channel, I have like every joint. You can go through every joint on the circles, and that's a good way to warm up and lubricate the joint, kind of get it moving, and just to assess your joint that way. So what have you done, Chewy?
So, this is one thing for you guys. As I get older, and I know many of the people that follow me are, usually I can look at my demographics and see when I'm looking at it, a good portion of you guys are, older. Like, and when I say older, I don't mean like old. I mean, some of you guys are older. I'm saying like basically 30 up, right? So if you're up above 30, you probably have a little bit of money that you can spend on things, right? I would encourage you to hire a coach, hire a physical therapist, hire someone to help you. Because again, going into this damn thing blind, it's not to say you can't figure it out, because you probably can, but you waste so much time.
Yes.
And, it's one of the things, I don't have many regrets in my life, but one of the regrets I do have is not hiring more coaches in different areas of my actual life. Because like, for instance, I always would go and pay money for coaches with business. It just made sense to me. You know more about this than me. You're further along than me. Please show me the way. Give me some ideas. Even if it's stuff that I would have figured out on my own eventually, you're saving me massive amounts of time.
Time is money.
Exactly. But then with like diet, with stretching, with lifting, it was like, I figured it out. Now I'm like the exact opposite. I'm like, okay, if I don't know how to actually do this, let's hire a consultant. Let's hire someone to show us how to. Even like with our, Jess and I are putting a garden together at the house. It's something new to us. We're hiring a consultant. Come out and show us like certain things about our soil and how to test things, and show us all this stuff that we would have learned had we been gardening for years, right? Yeah. So anyway, for me though, one of the things that's been really useful with the things I've been doing recently is having a plan that I'm staying consistent with. And then basically starting off you do the same stuff, starting off with my stretches. And again, my stretches, I'll typically hold multiple rounds. Typically it'll be like, 3 sets of like 1 minute holds, basically hold for a minute, move into it, and then, rest or move to another stretch, hold, this kind of thing. And then doing some exercises with that range of motion, so for instance, if I loosened up my knees and my ankles and my hips, all right, let's see how the squat feels now. And let's get into that squat. And let's hang out for a while. Let's load it with a little bit of weight, not much, but just a little bit. And let's play around in that space, and also too, being able to test and retest, like, okay, I can feel that I'm making some progress in that. And so I think the only thing that's been different for me is really staying disciplined with finding some exercise that are working, some stretches that are working, doing them like pretty much almost every day.
Yeah.
And then just making sure that I'm holding those holds long enough, making sure that it's not just, okay, I did it for 30 seconds. Like, no, I'm going to be like, it's not sexy. It's not fancy. It's sitting in a position and breathing, moving into the discomfort a little bit and hanging out for, 3 to 5 minutes at a pop, at a day. So again, that's been really useful to me. And one of the things I've felt, you said unlocking, I can't say that I'm unlocking my hips, but I have a lot more mobility, like when I'm dropping into my squat right now, where it feels smoother and everything feels stable. And I don't feel any pain or any like tension or anywhere. It's like, it just feels like this is a movement I should be able to do with no problem.
Yeah.
And again, that's been helpful to me. So again, take Eugene's advice. I would hire someone. And again, don't like hang on to those stretches, hold them longer when you're doing them, and then be consistent with them.
Yeah, I agree. And the only thing I'll add is like, what's your purpose? If you're trying just to improve general mobility in the hips, you may stretch differently before training as you do after training. Okay. And the other thing Chewy said, which is a great point, being consistent and also proper hold times. So if you're trying to create a little more range of motion, to get those things to stick, you got to be consistent. You have to hold, some of the research shows, a stretch about a total of 2 minutes. Okay. So do that. So warm up the joint, hold the stretch, and then load it a little bit, get a little bit of activation in those new end ranges, and then be consistent and allow that that stuff to stick. But again, like you said, get a specialist that hires this. If we go to jiu-jitsu, you know, you can do it online, blah, 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 looking at YouTube videos, but you're probably not going to get as good as going out there and having a coach really guide you and give you a game plan, you know, to go in and perform well. So,
right. Next question is, I don't have their names, but it says, Chewy, what's your favorite genre of history? I know you're a history geek. What's your favorite?
Genre of history?
Yeah, you know, or favorite, sorry, not genre, favorite time period, favorite.
Oh, okay.
Favorite time period of history. Sorry. Favorite time period of history. That's a tough one. I like a lot of stuff. With when I read history, I go in kicks. So basically, like, I remember, gosh, it was probably a long time ago, about 14 years ago. I remember I was listening to Dan Carlin for the first time, and he had the Death Throes of the Republic, which was like talking about the Roman Republic, and then that kind of thing. And it was this thing. I was like, this is so interesting. So I got into Roman history afterwards. So I read, you know, like I think 30 books on like Roman history from the Republic all the way until the fall, right? Over the course of a couple of years, because I was just interested in it. And then I remember in 2014, it was the centennial of the start of World War One. And I was really interested in World War One. It's not a war that a lot of Americans know much about, because we really didn't play, besides manufacturing things, we didn't play a massive role in it, because we came after the war was pretty much over, and we're like, hey, we're here, you know, and we didn't really do anything with it in relation to what the Europeans went through. And so I was interested. I was like, let's find out about this war. And it's this really interesting time period, because to read about it, to understand it, I had to kind of go back to like 1815 after Waterloo, the fall of Napoleon, and you get into like the 1870s, which, you know, you have the wars of German unification. You have things like the rifle being invented, where it was used at the Battle of Königgrätz, where they used the rifle for the first time against the Austrians, and like and then there's the Civil War, where I think the Civil War is actually one of the ones where they first used a rifle, and they had European observers like watching this thing being used, and this new technology is being mixed in with like the old world, where you still had kings and queens, and even they're being phased out by, like, you know, certain constitutional democracies and other governments and stuff like that. So it's a wild time when you're looking at like technological advance, and even just the way that culturally, the way things are going with governmental systems from like 1815 to about 1915. It's all happening. And then you get into the whole maelstrom of that, and it's wild. You know, you did all the stuff that's going on in World War One, and a lot of good books on it. So then I got in on that, you know, dove in on that little historical standpoint. So to sort of say to you a thing, I go on kicks, and so I don't know that I have a favorite time period in history. I like history. I think it's fun to read about. I think it's interesting to read about people's experiences. What I tend to read more of now, for whatever reason, is biographies and memoirs. I just like reading about like people's lives, whether it from their words or from other words. Right now I'm finishing up a book called Boyd, which is about a fighter pilot who then helped revolutionize air-to-air combat tactics, and also helped design some of the best planes of the day. And it's just interesting to hear about the way the guy was probably on the spectrum, because he was this incredibly brilliant guy that was this great fighter pilot that could dive into things like 100%, but then he was also incredibly loud. He'd be like a lieutenant colonel, and he'd be poking a general in the chest, telling him he was full of shit. He chewed off calluses off of his hand and spit them everywhere. I mean, like, it's just
strange,
just a strange thing. You know what I mean? So, but it's interesting to hear about these people. And I like reading those books. But again, as far as favorite time period, I don't have one. Do you play around with history much?
I do. Some. I mean, I like to, as far as like, I really like I would say I know the most about like the World War II type, about time period. I'm just having a grandmother that was a veteran, you know, World War II veteran. She has some pretty crazy stories. She's been past for a couple of years, but which is crazy to think about. You know, she was like almost 102 years old. In her early 20s. She was She was in the military. She was on the Russian German. She was obviously on the Russian side, but
Right.
she was on those front lines in war and dealing with injured soldiers, and actually being on the front lines was very interesting. But I know a lot about that time. I like when you're going back to, I don't know a lot about the time period, but listen to Stoicism and like
Different time period. Yeah.
just listening to those type of things, like from when that kind of originated. I would
Mhm.
say when Marcus Aurelius kind of just like, I like reading of the meditations and stuff like that. Just that, I don't know if it's necessarily like knowing about the time period so much, but like I like the ideas that came up around that time. It was very cool.
I gave you. I remember it was
You did for my son. Yeah.
for your son. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's like you're laughing. I was like, "Wait, am I saying something stupid here?"
No, I had forgotten all about that. I remember
Yeah.
like when you guys had a little like a gift thing. I remember I brought a copy of Meditations to you
Yeah.
because of why did I do?
My
Oh,
son's middle name is Aurelius.
That's right. I was like, that's why I remember it was his
Oliver
name.
Aurelius.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
just it just a lot of those ideas of Marcus Aurelius really spoke to me.
Sure.
Interesting. And yeah, so that was it. That was a cool. I don't know, just the ideas that people had, just the very, like you said, when you were talking about that time period you were sharing, it's almost like how much did war impact society, and vice versa, like just like how much society had to change because of like the different weaponry that was involved. I think that sounds like just for me, not knowing a ton about that, but like,
Uh-huh.
man, you got to change your tactics, change whatever. I mean, it could change the life of kind of just society altogether.
Well, I mean, again, war still affects us to this day. Just
Sure.
Americans were lucky, right? Most of us. But I mean, even like the way that they lived. I mean, think about this: like the 1800s was the time of industrialization.
Mhm.
So machines that are making stuff. I mean, like this is when you went from having people like working in a loom to all of a sudden now you have these machines that do the work. You know what I mean? It's just it's a wild time.
Yeah, like how war kind of like changed industry, production.
Well, I mean, so I mean,
innovation.
It kind of goes back and forth. I mean, like so, like when the airplane was invented, right? They're flying around with the airplane, and obviously, everybody looks at the airplane because of their own biases as something different, right? It's like if we come from a certain place, we see the world differently because of where we come from. So, there might be someone that was coming from a transportation angle and like, man, that would be great if we could put people on it and transport them. That would be fantastic. Whereas there were like, messages where I think there was they were flying a plane around as an exhibition around New York. They're flying around, and it's fairly low so everybody can see it. And, there's people that are in the military saying, hey, we can use that for something, right? Like we can use that. So again, I think it's what happens, it's not just a war thing. I mean, I think as the technology comes about, we feel like we all see it and we are, hey, we could do something with that. Obviously, production could make it faster to produce these things, whatever. But then there's other people that, hey, we can make clothing or I mean, whatever. So I think it's just the technology starts to sprout up, and then all of a sudden, it just spreads out into everything, right? And war is a type of business.
Yeah,
So
it's crazy to think about that way.
it is. Like, I mean, you got like people making bombs and making weapons. I mean, that's big business. So,
Yep.
Next question is basically someone was asking about taking seasons off. So they're like, currently they're taking a few months off from training. And they're wondering, Chewy, what do you think about having off seasons of jiu-jitsu like people have off seasons in other sports, right? So like in other sports, you don't have a season that's going year round. You have off seasons. So it's a great question. It's something I've thought about. So jiu-jitsu doesn't have an off season. And again, you have to think about a couple things. Number one, the intensity that a lot of times professional sports are playing and they're practicing at is an intensity that most of us are not. I mean, again, some of the young guys that are still competing in jiu-jitsu and stuff like that, maybe they are. But I mean, when you look at the intensity at say certain sports, they need an off season. Like a football player, a lot of times, as soon as they're done with their season, they go get surgeries because they're broken. I mean, you don't realize it when you're seeing these people. And I think about this all the time. When you look at a fighter, when you look at a pro football player, when you look at these guys, you look at them and you're like, well, they look like they're normal. Why are they playing like crap? Why did the person do this or that or whatever? And then you later find out, oh, well, that guy was playing with a broken collarbone, in the football. So, I mean, if you ever had a collarbone injury, it hurts. Or if you ever had like a shoulder separation, it doesn't feel good. So to be in like, essentially, like if you're a football player and you're in a car wreck every rep, that's probably not going to be the most fun thing to live with, right? And same thing with fighters. You see them and they look normal, but then you'll find out the guy doesn't have an ACL right now. So he's fighting without an ACL and he's just out there because he has to do it. And so again, it's one of those things where, eventually they need time off. But for a lot of us, our weekend warriors, people train a few times a week, you may not need an off season. That said, here's something to consider. One of my students is he was a very good wrestler, and he was saying during certain periods of the year, they would not have any live hard wrestling. It would all be like drilling and sort of like light flow chain wrestling, but nothing super hard. And then during the season, they would start to pick it up a little bit. And so you can institute those things for yourself. And as you get older, this becomes more of a necessity because your body just simply can't take the punishment every single day. If you want to keep training and not be broken, and again, that's for me, that's something that's important to me. I was like, I want to have longevity. I don't want to just burn out. Right. And so one of the things that I do now is I have these periods where I will get into shape. I'll push myself and really, burn the candle a little bit so that I can get ready for maybe a competition or something. And then the rest of the time is I'm training, I'm having fun, I'm pushing myself a little bit here and there, but for the most part, I'm taking it much easier. And so again, easier is going to be dependent upon you. But I don't know if you need an off season for months and taking off completely, but you could come in and say, you know what, I'm going to drill, I'm going to do technique, maybe roll a little bit, but I'm not going to roll too hard today. And maybe like I'll have this one day where I roll hard and these other days I just kind of take it easy and give yourself a little bit of a lighter training volume and intensity. And then you can periodically bump it up when necessary.
No, that's great points. Like I think competitions, like if you're like obviously trying to peak for a competition or push it harder, and then if you're not, you may be doing more like you're in the lab, you're working more through techniques or developing new techniques. It doesn't mean you have to go harder all the time. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if it would benefit to take extended period unless you're injured, to take extended periods of time off, kind of thing. I mean,
yeah, well, and it also comes down to like, why, like you're not gonna like the effects of coming back with no training after a while.
We'll think of like COVID for most of us, taking time off for COVID. It was miserable. It would take a while to get back, and also you're just rusty. And I think just being in the gym and even tapering, how hard you train. That I mean, I think most people that train jiu-jitsu and if they're not rolling, their body's usually probably holding up okay.
Yeah.
As long as you got to think about it. Are you eating well? Are you sleeping enough? Drinking enough water? Doing those type of things, adding a little strength training and a little mobility work, doing those things, you should be fine. I don't know, unless like you get bored with jiu-jitsu and you need time to like,
sure.
But that's a slippery slope, man. Cause it sometimes gets a little harder to come back if you're just like, oh, I like this time off.
Yeah.
You might like that time off a little too much. So for me, I don't think it's the best unless you're dealing with an injury but you still should be in the gym to some capacity if you're injured, whether it just means I'm just watching classes, I'm helping coach, doing whatever, not rolling, whatever it is. But like, I always recommend that especially if you're a white belt, to kind of try to keep your pulse on jiu-jitsu in some capacity. Otherwise it gets hard to come back.
It says, my question is, where do you see BJJ in the next 5, 10, 15 years? It's a great question. I mean, when I think about where it's gone now, basically what's like, when I think about like, say, the last 20 years with jiu-jitsu, the things that have changed, one is that it's taken on more of a sport element. For the same point, like there's a lot more jiu-jitsu competitions out there. Jiu-jitsu competitions are way more like there's more awareness around it. There's more of them. The personalities that are in jiu-jitsu are more present. Part of this is because of social media and stuff like that. And part of this is people doing their own branding and putting themselves out there. And the information is so abundant. And the level of jiu-jitsu has gotten so much better. Again, people, I've seen people poo-poo on people being a little bit softer in this generation, because back in the day, everybody trained hardcore back in the day. but it wasn't necessarily all that smart. Because I mean, again, I think you need to be beaten up a little bit so that you know that you can take it. But at a certain point, that's not necessary because you know that switch is there, right? Once you found the switch in your body that you can go into, that like is present when you need it to be, when you're tested, when you're getting your face smashed on the mat, and you got to like pull up some aggression to deal with it. Or you've got to go out to a competition, you got to turn it on, you got to flip that switch. As long as you know that's there and you know how that's fine. Then you got to start to work into more technical stuff. It's like the old MMA fighters used to all beat the crap out of each other, and then they realize that, well, yeah, you got to beat the crap out of them a little bit, but eventually you got to start to work more on technique. So to go to, I have no clue. I can only tell you where things have gone previously. I think that you'll probably start having more sections of jiu-jitsu where it's like, oh, this, like, it's becoming like that already, where it's becoming more, I'm only doing gi and I'm only doing no gi and things like that. But as far as where it's going, I have no clue. But those are my thoughts, and you can throw whatever you want to throw in.
So we're looking at popularity in jiu-jitsu. You want to look at, it is a sport. It's becoming more mainstream. There's some money in it. I have a fear of McDojo's popping up, right? I have a fear of,
it's gonna be like 80s
concern,
karate.
exactly, like the strip mall stuff. Like we come in, we do theoretical techniques, but we never really roll. If there's a gym you go into and they never roll, that's a red flag. You should be like, what's going on? There's other options, but like I other things to look at, but that's a concern. But I think definitely more people, like my wife's gotten into training, my kids do it. So it's a lot more friendly to people that aren't just like, I'm here to learn how to fight and do MMA. So it's a lot more friendly so there's going to be a lot more people doing it.
Yeah.
It's a lot more accessible. It's a lot more, I think, inclusive to many people. I think that's great. But we also have to make sure that the purity kind of like, hey, we're doing these techniques. We need to test it. So we need to roll. You should roll. There's gyms that don't roll, which some don't allow white belts to roll, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like,
it's weird.
It is weird, right? Because that's not the way, you started earlier than I did. But that's not the way I came up. I started in 08.
It's not the way that anybody came up.
Some people did. Some people are coming up. And now we got these.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, right? It's like you're taking the essence out of it, like of what makes it amazing is you can test your skill.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand a certain time period where maybe they don't roll, or they do situational rolling,
sure, that's
to prevent injury, but not allowing them to, one thing it's interesting that you brought up is like like we have like kids and women and everybody's training and it's great, whatever. Some people see that as a watering down, because you got to think about like when jiu-jitsu was first getting its roots stuck, it was about fighting. I mean, that's really what it was about. I mean, if you look at the lineage that I come from, which would come from like the Carlson side, right? It was like dudes fighting, guys getting in there, getting ready for a competition, getting ready for an MMA fight, and battling, and everybody fought. And that's what it was about. And it's like, if you didn't stick around, who gives a damn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was younger, I was very much about that. Yeah, right? Because it was just like, that's so cool. As I've gotten older, though, I'm like, well, you can make spaces for other people. Like, it's just like you can have your special forces in a military, but you also have a guy that drives trucks, and you have a mechanic over there, and you have people that do paperwork and stuff like that. Not everybody's meant to be, the special forces guy. So I think you can create spaces for people, and you can still have a gym that is competitive, that has those abilities to be tough and gritty and everything else. And you can tone it down a little bit for, say, someone that's like, hey, I want to train a couple times a week and that kind of thing. And then, that's their thing, and that's fine. And especially from a business standpoint, it's necessary.
Sure.
But from a standpoint of like one of those things where it's rewarding, because it's one of those things where when I was younger, all about training hard, all about hardcore. If you can't stick with it, I don't give a damn. And then as I've gotten older, I've like softened, because I've gotten older, right? And I'm feeling these different things, and I'm realizing I can't train like I was 23 all the time. And I'm also seeing like the rewarding side of like seeing these families train together. That's really cool. Or even seeing these kids grow up in front of me, and I'm like, oh, that's super neat. I mean, like, in seeing what it gives to them. And so there's other rewarding things besides just getting a guy ready for a fight who wins a MMA fight, right? Or a jiu-jitsu match. There's other things that are rewarding, but some people would consider that more of a watering down. I think it's just changing. But, I know what you're saying, where at least even if you soften a little bit, so that this way people have a chance to get accustomed to this hardness of this, well, they still need to be doing something tough. They need to be doing something challenging. They still need to have that stress of a rolling situation.
100%. I agree. I think you have to have that, because that's what, like, I feel like that's the essence of jiu-jitsu, is putting these techniques to the test in a way that's, controlled and safe.
Sure.
And there's got to be classes or spaces for people to go hard and sometimes get a little bloody, and that happens too. That's why you have competition. Now we have it was never like we have a women's class, we have a kids class, we have a competition. Now we can do that.
Yeah.
It's so much more popular. You can have a competition class, an advanced class, a beginner class, where you do a little bit easier stuff. So I think it's just anything can be kind of taken to the extreme one way or another.
Sure. When things change, and especially when things change from what you were used to, so I don't like this.
Yep.
Next question, last question is, do you have any strategies for the negative voice inside you when you get smashed? That's a good question. So the thing that I would get you to think about, if you have a negative voice, and this is something that was useful to me, is try to think about, and this might require a little bit of journaling, or just maybe some meditative thought, right? Meditative doesn't mean you have to sit there in like silence and not whatever, but just meditative thought. You're thinking about something. Meditations with Marcus Aurelius was him writing something down and meditating on an idea. Think about who taught you to talk to yourself like that. Nobody comes out of the womb talking to themselves in a negative way where, like, for instance, things that I would say, like, man, I would think to myself, you suck. Like I suck, or I might think to myself, like, who made you think that you were good enough to do this anyway? That kind of stuff. And then you got to think about, like, well, who taught me to talk to myself like that? Where did I learn this from? It's because, again, humans, we learn stuff from other places, and you really got to think about where this is coming from. Because, again, a child, a child doesn't come out and like all of a sudden grow into, like, when they're starting to talk words and stuff and start saying, I suck. It's something that's taught to them either through people they interact with, their parents, their family members, friends, TV, whatever. I mean, they learn it from somewhere. And so you've learned this negative self-talk from somewhere. It's not something that was born in you, right? All of a sudden you came up with this thing that, like, makes you feel bad about yourself when you don't live up to some expectation. And again, it's all wrapped around an ego. But I think it's really useful to think about, like, where did I learn this? Why on earth would I talk to myself like that? And then the second thing that I always say about this, or when I think about this, is if it's not something that I would say to someone else, if I, like, say, for instance, it's okay to be critical of people, right? It's okay to have criticism for people. Like, sometimes you have to have criticism for the people you love because you love them, right? And you love them, you want them to do better, right? So you might have a criticism for them, but you would probably package that criticism in a particular way that it would be more palatable, right? If I can't say what I said to myself to someone else, I'm not going to say to myself, or I'm at least going to be very diligent to stop that, right? Because if all of a sudden I'm saying, you fucking stupid idiot or something, just like to myself, like, hold on a second, like, just chill for a second. Why would I say that to myself, right? Now I could say, man, we could have done better on that. To myself, right? You can have those conversations just like I would to someone else. But I think it really goes back to those two things. One, you have to figure out why you speak to yourself like that, and why you think that is an acceptable way to speak to yourself, and where you learn that from. And then also, too, if it's not some way that you would speak to someone else, I would refrain from using it on yourself. Just something to think about. Like, those are two things that were useful to me. And again, it's always a practice. You because if it's something that you've learned, and it's something that it's a habit that you've had happen to you, then it's going to be a practice to unlearn it. And so you've got to be very aware, like, when those negative situations, you need to think about, like, the negative situations that are happening. And then when they happen, be ready for them, and be ready for your brain, that part of you that comes up through your subconscious, to all of a sudden say, insert whatever negative stuff you're talking about, and then shake that stuff off. Because, one, if you look at the situation, especially when you're talking about jiu-jitsu is an insignificant thing. It doesn't matter. You don't need to do it to live. It's not going to change the world, probably. It changes the world in some ways that can be beneficial, but you get what I'm saying. In the grand scheme of things, it's not that important. So instead, you can look at it from a standpoint of, like, this really isn't that important, but I do want to be good at it. It is meaningful to me. okay, what should I do to fix this? I'm getting smashed. Why am I getting smashed? And because there's not such a negative association with it, you can look at it a little bit more objectively rather than, and actually learn from the situation rather than driving home and beating yourself up in the car because, you made a stupid mistake or something like that, which is completely normal for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think the first thing that you mentioned, which is really important, is awareness. Like, bring awareness to what you're doing, or like why you're talking to yourself that way. And the only thing I'll add is, I get in a pattern, like a ruminate, like a pattern of like, oh man, like fixate on the
Sure.
mistake or the error or the negative self-talk. So you got to get that stuff out somehow. For me, it's like, it could be exercise, or a lot of times I'll journal about it. I'll just write it, and then getting it out in some form
Mhm.
is actually been really helpful for me to kind of like, because once you get it out, you can kind of like even reread what you wrote and kind of start to kind of objectively look at it and see what it is. And then sometimes those situations of those mistakes or that negative self-talk, if you can kind of look at it, you can actually use it to your advantage in a lot of ways to learn from it, or to learn from not necessarily the self-talk, but from the situation it arose from. It can kind of help you, like if you had a really bad tournament, jiu-jitsu tournament, well, okay, you can say I suck, or you can say, all right, what did I do wrong there? How can I correct it? Go back into the lab, go to the gym, talk to your coach, get some pointers, and go back out there and do it. And for me, the best thing was to get out there and compete again as quickly as possible, just to get that taste out of my mouth. I felt like that was something I needed to do when I was dealing with some of those difficulties. So
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln, he had a famous thing. I think when he died, they found a chest full of letters that he had written to people that he never actually sent to them, and they were like nasty letters.
Nice.
It was like all the nasty stuff that he wanted to say to these people. He wrote it down in a letter, and they'd be scathing, and then he would put it into the chest, and then he would actually write the letter he would send. But he would put it together first, and then he would send it. Like there was one he was writing one to like a general who who was a kind of a very passive general, wasn't very aggressive, and he had like General Lee like on the ropes basically. If he would have pressed the attack, could have put this damn war to end. And he wrote him a letter like, basically, what the hell are you doing? We could have won this damn thing, you big dumbass, right? This kind of thing. And then he took it, and he realized that under terrible conditions, it's like just stuff. So then he wrote him another letter that was much gentler, much kinder. And so sometimes if you have, like you said, something that's really bothering you, instead of ruminating on it, whatever, just write it out, get it out of your system, and then all right, proceed to do whatever you want to do. So all right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. Hopefully there was a couple ideas in there that were interesting to you. And again, if you guys ever want to be on the inside for that kind of stuff, whether it be questions for the podcast or something like that, two ways to do it. One is you can join our patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Upon joining, you get the exclusive library that we have for the Patreon, but you'll also have a little bit more access if you have a question for the podcast. So you can send it through there to Eugene, and those typically get a little bit expedited. Preferential treatment, we'll say, right? Because again, you're helping support the podcast. So if you have something on your mind that you want to address on a podcast, we'll be happy to do it for you. And then also the other option is you can join my email list at chewjitsu.net/join. And when you join the email list, again, I do a bunch of different stuff. There's a lot of times it's like little philosophical ideas, stories, things like that. The stuff you would be used to from the podcast and the videos. But then on top of that, there are times where I get like a hair up my butt and I want to do something different. And, maybe I send you a thing for a question that I can answer for you. And it's also, if you want to get a question to me, that's the other best way to do it, because that seems to be the easiest one for me, is dealing with email. Again, big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this damn thing happen every single week. Charles Web CBD. Again, it's a great CBD product. It's a CBD product that I use. I like it as an aid to my recovery. I use a lot of things for recovery, things like, obviously, like, I eat a good diet. I get a lot of sleep, very regimented about my sleep time. I have, like, me and my wife, we have like the same sleep time almost every night. And I wake up about the same time every morning. And having a toddler running around, like, man, it makes you much more disciplined on your sleep, because you got to be.
Yeah.
But that said, that's really important. The diet's really important. Cutting out a lot of sugar and stuff like that. Like, I tell everybody else, like, man, if you cut out a lot of refined sugars and processed foods, you'll probably feel a lot less inflammation and stiffness in your body.
Yeah.
But assuming that you're doing all the basics, right, then you get into supplementation. And CBD has been a really helpful supplement for recovery. And again, you can check out their stuff and see for yourself. I mean, that's always what I tell people. Like I'll have students will say, does this stuff really work? is it actually good, Chewy? You know what I mean? I'm like, well, I like it. Now you may not like it. I don't know, but the best thing you can do is try, right? And see what it does for you. And again, you can go to their website at charlesweb.com, try out their stuff. And again, whatever you find that you want to try, just use the promo code Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order, which will be more than what they typically offer on their website. Also, thanks to my buddy Matt at Epic Roll. He's been a sponsor of the podcast for a long time. And again, he makes really good jiu-jitsu gear. I get my no-gi gear made through him. We're actually getting, I'm working or waiting to get the next prototype of jiu-jitsu rash guards and shorts made. Excited to get those. So those should be in sometime soon for my students who are also getting our Derby City gear that's made for Matt. That'll be coming in soon. But again, if you guys want to get some new gear, get some new t-shirts, jiu-jitsu related stuff, whatever it might be, go to his website at epicrollbjj.com. The website is, that's the website. Promo code is Jiu-Jitsu20. And just to let you guys know, I always share this, right? Again, anybody listening, I consider any of you guys, even if you're not my student, like I consider you like an extension of my students, right? And then that said, there's a good chance there's a lot of my students listening to this podcast. Because I went into the gym today, and like several of my students are wearing Epic Roll podcast or Epic Roll gear. Mm-hmm. So I imagine, probably where they heard about it. With that said, when I share stuff like this, I know they're going to hear it. So I'm not trying to people do ad reads and things like that. And none of the products that we ever put on here are they're not crappy products. We've turned down lots of stuff over the years, which is why we don't have because we get random stuff like, hey, put this on your podcast for X amount of dollars. But if it's not something that I actually want to support, I don't do it. So they have to make good stuff. So I share that with you guys. People do ad reads. Sometimes people wonder hey, is this real? It's anything that I'm sharing with you, I feel comfortable sharing with my students, and I love my students. I consider them like friends, and then I have to take care of them. And so, anyway, trying to take care of you guys too, and with good stuff. So Jiu-Jitsu20 is the promo code. I don't know if I said that at checkout. And guys, I think that's it. That's it for us. So again, hopefully you guys enjoyed the podcast. Thank you for joining us as always, and we'll talk to you next time.